Hello everyone, my name is Zenitsu and I'm back with another Digimon deck profile video. So today I'm going to be taking a look at BT14, and BT14 offers us lots of new and powerful tools to be able to build and iterate on some new and existing decks. And today's deck I'm going to be taking a look at is going to be a new iteration on the Blue Hybrids deck. So if you're unfamiliar with what Blue Hybrids was, well, it really wasn't a deck that was in the forefront for a while because of the limitation on Tommy. Blue Hybrids was still somewhat playable just because there was still some pretty solid Blue Hybrid based Digimon that we had to play around with, on top of Blue having some really good Tamer value. But without that Tommy, it kind of made the strategy fall a little bit flat on its face, and now that Tommy is unlimited, it's time to take a look at what the deck is trying to do. So the main strategy of what Blue Hybrids is trying to do is strip away the opponent's inheritable sources and then stunlock their Digimon from being able to attack or defend, and keep them stunned so that way you have easier ways to be able to generate extra resources for them having a Digimon that they can't use and can't get rid of. So I think that it's going to be a really interesting deck to play, with lots of different ways that you could approach the deck because of all of the different tools that we have to be working with. We do have to understand that the deck still has some innate weaknesses. So one of the weaknesses is abilities to redirect that basically aren't blocker, adding extra ways to be able to defend that Blue Hybrids doesn't actually have a counter around. Then it also has a problem innately with the X antibody option card, just because that card can't be stripped, and well, if you can't get the opponent to have a Digimon with no sources, it makes it very hard to trigger some of your various different abilities. Then the tempo of the deck is on the slower side, which isn't that unusual for a more control orientated deck, but that's mostly because the deck actually doesn't have a way to be able to play out its Tamers, so you're always going to have to be hard playing them, and sometimes that's not the most reasonable move, especially when other decks just have abilities to be able to play out their Tamers for free to be able to gain them that tempo and advantage. But once you understand all of that, it's still a very fun and interesting deck that does have lots of depth on the different tools that you have to be able to build it based on what you personally like. So with all that said and done, let's just dive right into the deck profile, starting off with the Digitamers. So I'm going to be running 4 copies of Bukamon from BT14 as the main Digitama because this card is so good, there's no reason not to use it as a Digitama, because it's a really easy way to be able to give your Digimon jamming, meaning that their attacks into the opponent's security are going to be super safe. Then if you want a 5th Digitama, you could use the BT11 Wanyamon as just a pretty decent generic draw engine. Next, on to the level 3s, I'm going to be running 4 copies of Gomamon. So Gomamon is one of those brand new tools that allows us to try to strip the opponent's inheritables away, because when we move him out of the raising area, or if he's just already on the field at the start of our main phase, we just get to trash 1 card, it doesn't matter what card it is, off of one of the opponent's inheritables. So that's already really good, allowing us to pick it and choose what inheritables we want to get rid of. Then on top of that, this Digimon also can't be blocked for the turn, so even if they do have some defense, we could try to use this card to be able to bypass it, and this does carry over through the higher stages, so we could use this to make our higher stage Digimon unblockable as well. Then its inheritable ability is actually really insane, allowing us to be able to have a recursive level 3, because during the opponent's turn, when this Digimon would be deleted, then we get to play out a Gomamon from the Digivolution source for free, so we could try to maintain a body at any given moment, allowing us to be able to reuse the cards that we already have. Then on top of that, I'm going to be running 4 copies of the BT4 Strabimon. So this is just the stereotypical digging tool looking for our hybrid traded Digimon and our blue Tamers. And then the last rookie of the deck is kind of a tech or flex spot. You could really have it be whatever you feel like you want it to be based on the type of level 4s that I'm going to be playing. I'm just going to be running 4 copies of the BT6 Strabimon, mostly to use for its inheritable ability to have some extra memory generation. And now going into the level 4s, this is where things could get a little bit on the interesting side, but no matter what blue hybrid deck you're going to be playing, you're always going to be playing 4 copies of Korikakumon. So Korikakumon is basically the face level 4 of what Blue Hybrids is trying to do, because we could Digivolve on top of a Tamer as if that Tamer was a level 3 Digimon for the cost of 2, giving us a whole bunch of different ways to be able to utilize this card, just because it could also Digivolve on top of level 3s and level 4s as well. But as far as why we're actually utilizing this card, it is going to be the main way we're going to be stunlocking the opponent's Digimon. So when we Digivolve up into them, if there's a card with Hybrid in its traits or Tamihimi in its Digivolve in this Digimon's Digivolution source, then one of the opponent's Digimon with no Digivolution sources can attack or block until the end of the turn. So Tamihimi already wants us to try to strip and stun, and then Tami allows us to have recursive ways to stun their Digimon, and this is just a good way to be able to get that stun engine going. So as far as other resources that we're going to be using to remove inheritable sources, that's why I'm going to be running 2 copies of Kumamon, because it's just a very simple hybrid for us to use that also has the ability to not only just Digivolve on top of our blue Tamers, but also trash the bottom Digivolution source on one of the opponent's Digimon, to make sure that their Digimon doesn't have any Digivolution sources. Then on top of that, I'm also going to be running 2 copies of Ikakumon. So this is kind of another tech or flex spot, and you can kind of use whatever you feel like you want to use. But I really do like what Ikakumon offers the deck, just because we get to trash any 2 Digivolution sources off of the opponent's Digimon. So we could pick and choose, again, what we want to get rid of, while also having a nice aggressive when attacking ability, where until the end of the opponent's turn, one of the opponent's Digimon with fewer Digivolution sources than this Digimon can't attack, so it's essentially another way to try to stunlock their Digimon. Then on top of that, it also has a nice inheritable ability for us to be able to utilize. Again, it's another recursive way for us to be able to try to stunlock their Digimon to keep them from doing anything with it. And then the last champion of the deck is going to be 3 copies of Lanamon. Lanamon, like Kumamon, is another hybrid, so we could use it to Digivolve on top of our Tamers, on top of the fact that she can grant herself jamming. So even if we don't utilize our egg, we could still have the ability for us to have a Digimon with jamming for us to utilize, as long as we're going to be placing a blue level 3 Digimon from our hand to the bottom of our Digivolution source, which between our Strabimon and our Gomamon means that we could line up her inheritable abilities with specific things that we want to try to make our Digimon as effective as possible. And then when it comes to the level 5s, I'm just running a pretty simple but effective level 5 lineup of 2 copies of Zudomon Ace. So this is just the Ace Digimon card to try to act as a nice hand trap, because we're going to be aggressive with our level 4 Digimon. Then for utilizing this card, whether we're playing it or Digivolving it, we get to trash at any 2 sources from one of the opponent's Digimon, and then return any Digimon with no Digivolution sources back to their hand. So it's a good way to try to get rid of problematic Digimon that we might not be able to get rid of otherwise. And Beowulfmon is kind of trying to do the same thing, where it's just an easy level 5 for us to Digivolve up into, just because if it has a Tamer in its Digivolution source, as far as the Digimon we're Digivolving off of, then we get to reduce the Digivolution cost by 2, making him 1 to evolve into, while also having a way to recursively add back our hybrids, so that way we could be able to use our hybrids over and over again, while also being able to bounce an opponent's level 4 or lower Digimon by returning that hybrid from its inheritable source to our hand as well. And speaking of more control, I'm going to be running 2 copies of Mirage Gaugamon as the main level 6 Digimon for the deck. So Mirage is a really easy card for this deck to use as one of the best level 6, because we're either going to A, bounce one of the opponent's level 5 or lower Digimon back into their hand, or B, burn their security back into their hand, so that way we don't actually have to deal with it, and it allows us to aggress even easier. But the most important part of this card actually is that secondary ability, where it works during all turns, so where when a card is added into the opponent's hand by an effect, then we get to gain a memory for every 4 cards in the opponent's hand. So if we're able to go up into a Mirage fast enough, we could actually anti-tempo the opponent pretty hardcore, locking them potentially out of certain play lines, which makes Mirage super valuable for us to use. And then I'm going to be running 1 copy of Imperial Dramon Dragon Mode Ace as just another Ace hand trap for us to use, but this is actually a super important card, because it's one of the few ways we actually have to be able to play out our our Tamers for free, because when this Digimon becomes suspended, whether it's during our turn or the opponent's, it doesn't matter, then we get to play out one Tamer card or Digimon with 4,000 or less DP from our hand for free. So most of the time we're just going to be using it to set up our Tamers, because this deck has 0 ways outside of this card to actually play its Tamers for free. Then it has a nice on-play and when Digivolving ability to suspend one Digimon down and then unsuspend one Digimon, so we could use this aggressively or defensively depending on how we're actually going to be utilizing this card. And because we're going to be leaving some level 5s out like Wolfbon, where it's going to swing ideally with jamming, then that lines us perfectly for that clutch ace opportunity. And then the level 7s of the deck, I'm just going to be using one copy of the BT5 Omnimon as an alternative win condition. You technically don't have to run any level 7s if you don't want to, just the fact that sometimes you want that extra damage in just to close out games is still really valuable, allowing this Digimon to unsuspend itself and attack even if the memory goes onto the opponent's side because of Blitz, means that we could sometimes just win the game out of nowhere. And then as far as the Tamer lineup, I'm going to be running 4 copies of Tamihimi. So Tamihimi, now that it's unlimited, we might as well run as many copies of this card as we can, because this is one of the best ways to try to trash inheritable sources, where its on-play ability allows us to trash 3 from the bottom of one of the opponent's Digimon. So it's just a good way to constantly try to strip the opponent of their sources. But the main pull and the reason why Tamihimi is so good is its inheritable ability for our hybrids to take advantage of, where until the end of the opponent's turn, one of the opponent's Digimon with no Digivolution sources can't attack or block. Continuously having a way to be able to stunlock their Digimon is super valuable. Then I'm going to be running 3 copies of Sora and Joe. So Sora and Joe is going to be the main resource or value engine to be able to take advantage of the fact that we want them to have a Digimon with no Digivolution sources in play, because at the start of our turn, we're going to be gaining 2 memory for that. Then the other thing about this card is it's also acting as another way to continuously trash the opponent's inheritable sources, where when our blue Digimon attacks, we get to suspend the Tamer down to trash the bottom 2. So it's just a good way to have more source stripping goodness. And then the last Tamer of the deck is going to be 3 copies of Davis. So Davis is going to be the deck's dedicated memory fixing Tamer, making sure that we actually have memory to play around with. And we don't care about having extra Davises because he's some of the best fodder, because he has a really good on-play ability that's helping with the deck's overall consistency that sometimes we need to use multiple times. So we could have multiple Davises out, and then after that, the extra Davises don't really do anything, so that just makes them good hybrid fodder. But the fact that we get a look at the top 3 with this card for any blue Digimon is super valuable at making sure the deck is going to be as consistent as possible. And then when it comes to the option lineup, the options of this deck, you do have lots of flexibility on what you want to be playing around with. So just because I have something doesn't mean that there aren't other good options that you could think about running. So I'm going to be running 3 copies of Sorai. Sorai is just used as the big hard removal card. It's not actually removing Digimon, it's just making it really hard for the opponents to deal with sometimes, especially if they're trying to create wide boards, because we get to trash the top 4 Digivolution sources, which is a lot of sources all at once, and then until the end of the opponent's turn, if their Digimon doesn't have any Digivolution sources, then they can't attack, having an alternative way to be able to stunlock their Digimon, and the important thing is potentially stunlock their whole field. And then the other options of the deck I'm going to be running is 2 copies of Mental Training. So Mental Training is just another consistency tool, looking at the top 2 for any blue card. Doesn't matter if it's a blue option Digimon or Tamer, it just is looking for any blue card, which makes this really good at having alternative ways to find what we need. Then its delay ability is a little bit less useful when it comes to how we can use this card for the deck, just because we can't use it on top of blue Tamers as if they were Digimon, because it needs to target a Digimon specifically. So you're going to be using this going from your level 3s to your level 4s, and you're going to be using this mostly going from your level 5s to your level 6s. So those are the 2 primary things that you're going to be using its ability to be able to reduce the Digivolution cost of the Digimon you're choosing to Digivolve with this ability for. And then I'm also going to be running 2 copies of Blue Memory Boost just as another digging tool. This is digging a little bit deeper, but hitting less potential targets because we're only able to hit blue Digimon, which is mostly what we're trying to find anyway outside of our Tamers. Then its delay ability is just generically better, where it's just allowing us to gain 2 memory, so that way we have multiple different ways to be able to spend that memory if we need to play a Tamer or Digivolve alternatively. And that's kind of it for the deck. There is a lot of flexibility when it comes to the different packages and engines that you could run in the deck. Like you could think about utilizing Ukamon, you could think about utilizing Jerry and the Leomons, you could even think about utilizing some Ulforce stuff, and there is just a lot of other blue hybrid tech and blue floodgates that you could think about running, all depending on the meta that you're going to be going up against and the cards you want to prioritize playing with specific effects that you feel like you need for how you want to be approaching this deck, which makes it a really fun and interesting deck to experiment around with. And then as far as some future upgrades, well, we currently don't have anything directly supporting blue hybrids in terms of new hybrids, but we do have cards that are going to be helping with some source stripping strategies we could potentially think about utilizing in order to further enhance the source stripping aspect of what blue hybrids is trying to do, allowing us to at least have something to be able to look forward to in terms of new tech and tools.